happy to see that everyone survived the Ides of March and the time change. And Councillor Wilson, you've made it regardless of your earlier text, so thank you. There's Mr. Gibbon. I was waiting to see his face outside the Library and Cultural Centre by the look of it on a sunny morning. All right, we're a few minutes late. I will call this regular meeting of Council of the Municipality of Jasper to order for March 16th. Councillors, you have today's proposed agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or other changes to be made to the agenda? Seeing nothing, may I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda as presented? I'm sorry, Councillor Butler.
Thank you. Sorry. With the will of council, I would like to request the addition of a meeting of a session, an item at the end of the agenda for a closed session discussion as a human resources matter.
Thank you. Well, we'll have to get that in between 12 and 13, I guess, then, unless we simply renumber in camera to 13 and adjournment as 14. I'm sorry, Councillor Butler, you said a personnel matter? So under that, I think section 24 applied.
That's correct. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If there are no other requested changes, I will ask for a motion on Councillor Butler, or pardon me, a vote on Councillor Butler's motion to amend the agenda by the addition of an in-camera item, which we will call agenda item 13 and renumber adjournment to number 14. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And might I have a motion then to approve the agenda for today's meeting as amended? Councillor Demota, thank you. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Agenda item 3, approval of the minutes. The minutes of the regular meeting of March 2nd have been circulated. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? If there are none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes of the March 2nd meeting as presented? Councillor Journeau, thank you. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Agenda item 4, a standing matter under presentations, a presentation or an update on the Emergency Coordination Center, a verbal report. Mr. Gibbon, through you, I presume, to Mr. Van Tighem, who has a screenshot at least appearing on my screen. So Mr. Van Tighem, if you're available, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Council. If I may, Your Worship, I have my regular report, which would also encompass the ECC report.
Yeah, Your Worship, I was just going to say, maybe I will just say in terms of item 4.1, we did meet last week, and Mr. Van Tighem in his report under 6.1 will provide Council a broader view of the ECC and its go forward position.
All right, that's perfectly acceptable. So we will withhold agenda item 4 and roll that into agenda item 6.1, which takes us into agenda item 5, business arising from previous minutes. Is there any business arising from minutes of previous meetings? Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to confirm the status of one item, and that is motion 6821 on the minutes of our last meeting. The third bullet of that motion relates to the allocation of $350,000 to upfront project costs for the Cannot Drive affordable apartments. subject to approval of the Rapid Housing Initiative grant application. I have the misfortune or regret in informing council that we were not selected. Our RHI application was not selected, and I will place on next week's agenda the correspondence from the CMHC with respect to that. We have been asked to consider leaving our application in place for a possible second intake into that program should additional money be allocated to the Rapid Housing Initiative. But I think that it is appropriate that we consider the status of that third bullet, which was meant to release or allocate that funding subject to approval of our grant application. So I just bring that up, not necessarily for full discussion today, but something that perhaps we would request that administration consider, look into the status of that piece of work, which included, I think, some tree clearing and other pre-development work, and then perhaps report back to council on whether they would advise spending some or all of that, given that the grant application has not been approved, or at least we might hope not yet approved. And I just wonder, Mr. Given, not to put you on the spot, but if that would be a reasonable course of action from the point of view of your position as CEO of Jasper Community Housing Corporation.
Your worship, to Councillor Butler's question first, from a MOJ perspective, I can say that administration saw that as a contingent motion, so I don't think there's any action required from council related to that. I believe the JCHC will be meeting in the coming weeks to determine its go-forward position. That may have some influence on actions that it might recommend or request that the municipality take in 2021 to prepare for any housing project on that site. Having said that, I don't believe that there's any need for council to take any action unless the JCHC recommends something specific. At this time, we certainly have our hands full with the project of utility installation, and I can inform council that administration is working with Parks Canada to ensure that we can advance that project in this year as directed by council in the second bullet point of the motion. So I don't believe there's any action required on bullet point 3 at this time, but Councillor Butler and I would be able to return to council after the JCHC meets to advise council if there's any particular actions that they would advise related to the housing project or future potential housing projects on the site.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much, Mr. Given. That seems perfectly appropriate. I'm glad to hear that, and I agree. A meeting of the Jasper Community Housing Corporation will, and we have already talked about holding one in the next couple of weeks, so the JCHC can consider next steps. We weren't expecting the potential of a response saying that we were denied the application, but perhaps could look forward to a future acceptance. And then the other piece of business to consider is moving back to the co-investment model for Connaught Drive housing, and whether the JCHC sees fit to recommend moving forward with that in the interim. So there's an amount of discussion to be had there at the board level, and we'll do that and then return back to council with recommendations. So thanks very much for that, Mr. Gibbons.
Thank you for that, Councillor Butler. And thank you for gently breaking that sad news in pieces a little bit now and some more later. Any other business rising from the minutes? All right, if not, agenda item 6, we can move to department reports, which is protective services. And again, I'll return to Mr. Van Tighem, and you can roll in the Emergency Coordination Center update into this report. So go ahead, Mr. Van Tighem.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. The report is as you all see in front of you. I'm not sure if you've all had a chance to review it in any depth, but I'll just touch on some highlights, and then perhaps at the end I can leave it for any questions that may arise, and I'll do my best to answer them. So as you can see, there's been a total of 38 emergency responses since my last report. And I'm not going to go into detail, but the majority of the calls were either alarm calls or motor vehicle collisions in this past quarter or past few months since my last report. And the fire department training, this time I opted to provide you with a list of the training that we've been doing. And just as kind of a overall awareness is that we have hired a contract training officer to fill the void of our previous training officer moving on. And it is an in-house hire from one of our lieutenants who is a qualified training officer. And we're quite very happy with the progress that this individual's made, as well as the quality of the training that we've been fortunate to have. And just on that note too, we are still training virtually for the most part. We just recently initiated from very small group training, person to person, which involves less than 5 people in one area. And what we're usually using as an area is usually outdoors or the fire base. So we are still very much.
Sorry, Mr. Van Tighem, you have muted yourself.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Honestly, I didn't touch anything. So we have moved slowly into a person-to-person training, which is less than 5 people in a group, and those interactions take place inside the fire bays or outside. And we are going to carefully monitor the COVID guidelines moving forward, and we'll adjust as necessary. So training is underway for planning some wildland urban interface training coming up in May, as well as we're looking at an aerial course and a few other larger courses too. But every Tuesday night is basically a virtual training session for now.
Again, Mr. Van Tighem.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Your Worship, what's happening there, but it keeps muting. The forced fuel reduction program has essentially wound down as far as the work on the ground goes. Yesterday would have been our last day with crews working, that mainly due to the fact that the weather conditions have changed, and one of the major criteria for carrying out this type of work is frozen ground and snow cover. So we didn't quite finish everything we wanted, but we almost did, which is a very positive. The only area that we didn't complete was what we're calling Walkerville West, and that's a strip of pine beetle trees that are kind of on the edge of the rail yard on the south side, just west of or southwest of Walkerville. So the plan is to move that unit into the fall, and there's also a couple of other units where we got the majority of the work done, but perhaps some piles weren't dealt with and things like that. The only other remaining task that's on the agenda for this current period is to move the logs that are decked out at the cemetery to the mill and Grand Cache, and to clean up a few of the areas where they're clean up the burn rings, and then the final inspections, and then kind of signing off on the project at this stage. And then we move on and re-adjourn in the fall. Speaking of the mill, this is a question that came up from a member of the public to council, I think a few weeks ago, and it is in my report. But there are times during this forced fuel reduction programming where we do actually sell logs to generate revenue for the project. And just to be clear, this is a very detailed process that's done under contract, and it's overseen by Parks Canada. And we are required by contract to any timber sales or any revenue that is that comes out of this project must go directly back into the project. So the revenue in becomes an increase in the project objectives. It's not, there's no way or any place where any of that revenue from timber goes anywhere else but right back into the project. And we don't normally sell timber in this project. However, there are areas where it's deemed as the most prudent thing to do in reducing smoke, or just if the volume of the timber is such that it would not make sense to burn it or produce firewood out of it. And speaking of firewood, we do have the local resident firewood project where residents can come to the fire hall on business days, business hours, and purchase a permit for $10. Then they're directed to a location where they can safely remove prepared firewood for their personal use. And that is ongoing. The unit we just completed on the weekend was Snape's Hill, and I apologize to the residents for the smoke we produced, but there was a couple of hours in Saturday and Sunday where there was a little bit too much smoke around that area, but I can assure you that's over now for at least another season, and thank you for bearing with us. The next thing on my report was the emergency management report, and we had just recently completed our Alberta Emergency Management Agency audit, which is an annual audit from the province that basically goes through a process of checking our all our requirements under the Local Authority Emergency Management Plan and the Provincial Emergency Management Act, etc. This year we did receive a passing grade. Overall, we did have some deficiencies, and the majority of those were related to the fact that the Local Authority Emergency Management Act was updated, or actually fairly extensively updated January of 2020. And in those updates, there were some new requirements for municipalities. Subsequently, those requirements were postponed until 2021 due to COVID. So the majority of the recommendations that pertain to Jasper relate to the fact that these are new regulations, or new occurrences from the updated LAMER. And a lot of them boiled down to just process. And so we will be looking into that immediately. And moving on with emergency management, there's also and this was something that we just moved forward today, was the Emergency Coordination Center, the ECC update, which is under pandemic response in your report. So as you know, we initiated our ECC back in March 12th of 2020 to react to the COVID situation. And for the most part, we've been operating. We did take a pause during last summer and then reactivated again. And we just recently, in fact, last week, we have now taken another pause. We have put the ECC on hold because we feel that at this present time, it's not necessary to go through those weekly cycles with the ECC group. We feel that everything that needs to be done and is being done can be done under normal operations. And as mentioned in the report, we will monitor the situation, obviously, and adjust or adapt as required. And the last part of the report was just an update on the bylaw department that indicated some of the administrative tasks that have happened over the period, as well as some additional tasks. There's a little bit of information on staffing, as well as a little chart there that just kind of shows you a month-to-month list of interactions, of different types of interactions. And I guess the biggest news with bylaw right now is we have hired the third officer. We are fortunate to get somebody that was local and already had the certification. However, that person will still be required to go through the 2-week training program, which is happening right now. So the foot patrols will increase. They were 5 days a week. They are presently 6 days a week, and shortly they will go to 7 days a week. Right now, I believe it's say an 8 to 4 shift. And then as we get closer to the summer, that changes from essentially from 7 till 10. And we'll also be hiring the usual summer student sometime in May that gets us through June and July and August. And I think just as an anecdote, I think on Saturday alone, we issued 40 warnings for individuals in the downtown core not wearing masks. So the foot patrols are active, and they are working. That is my report, Your Worship and Council, and if there's any questions, I will do my best to answer them for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Tighem, a very thorough report. I appreciate that. Questions from councillors, beginning with Councillor Demota, then Councillor Butler, then Councillor Wilson, and then Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Mr. Van Tighem. Just because it was the last item discussed with the ECC report, I appreciate all the info. I do have another one on the fire, but seeing as this was fresh, I was just wondering if there was any discussion at the ECC level with, the summer season coming along and the rollout of vaccinations, how the patrolling might look like with people having or may not having the vaccines and choosing to not to wear masks, or people that are vaccinated that don't have to wear masks, and how that's going to kind of work with the mix of visitation in the community.
Well, we presently, and as always, we will follow Alberta health guidelines and directives, and that's that's kind of the bottom line here. If the directive changes to people that do have the vaccine don't have to wear masks, well, obviously that's going to complicate things considerably. The foot patrols will be spending a lot more time interacting with people, finding out why they do or do not have a mask on. But I think the anticipation is that for at least the next while, we will be requiring masks regardless. And just on that note, too, Councillor D'Amato, it's the whole purpose of these interactions is one of education, and I think the officers are doing a really good job in dealing with this in a manner that's very positive. And I think the public is very, very few cases where the public is negative to this kind of approach. So I think sometimes people just forget, and they got the mask down around their chin, or maybe they just forget to put it on. And it's just a little gentle, friendly reminder. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Tighem. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Tighem. Thank you very much for a really thorough report. I just wanted to highlight and comment on two things. The first is I really appreciated all the details on fire department training. And what I want to say is I think we're all aware of how difficult any group or team efforts and undertakings are these days. Council gets it, everyone does. And I was just really interested to read about all the training that's being done. And I wanted to thank you and the team for doing absolutely everything you can to keep the team together and esprit de corps and all of that, which is just so critical in our environment of a volunteer fire department. And it's just noticed and appreciated. And on behalf of the community, I think I can express real gratitude for all those ongoing efforts. I can't imagine that it's very easy. So thank you for that. And then on the second thing, just wrapping up Fire Smart for this year. And I've been watching this unfold, of course, every year for years, as we all have. I want to also thank you and all of your partners in Parks Canada and other agencies for all of the work that's been done over the years. I know that what we see going on out there is always the result of a lot of planning and cooperative effort and negotiation to get the work done. And the community is really grateful. I would hazard that we all feel a little safer now in our community with respect to the likelihood of wildfire incursion into the community than we did when I started on council in 2017. So thanks to everyone who has made all that work possible. It's much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butler, and I appreciate those words of support for the training program and for Fire Smart. I should have mentioned too in my report, I did allude to the contract or the new agreement, the collaboration agreement we have with Parks Canada that was just signed here last month. And as I made aware, there is $200,000 made available for the current project, and also another approximately 100,000 into the 2022 project. So that's a huge boost to the residents of the community of Jasper. And thanks to Parks Canada for that contribution.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both for that. Councillor Wilson.
Hi, Mr. Van Tighem. I just wanted to touch on the bylaw and foot patrols that are occurring, and it's promising that we have a third officer coming online. Although currently, I think there is a bit of a challenge on Friday and Saturday evenings in the peak hours of people downtown. And I've been approached by a few people, went to experience it on Friday night, and unfortunately, nobody's out on, like, we don't have bylaw out during our highest times of people being in the downtown core. And I'm hoping that we can remedy that as soon as we can, because it is busy. Every restaurant we went into had a half an hour wait if you didn't have a reservation. So there's people out there, there's people on the streets, and I stopped in to check on a friend working at a local liquor store, and she broke down in tears having to enforce the masking bylaw without the ability to call bylaw at the time that they're working. So, and that's, I think, when you're going to see a lot of the bigger clashes. So I'm hoping that you guys have been discussing, getting, nobody wants to work a Friday, Saturday night, but I think it's almost crucial because those are our peak hours of people downtown. And have you explored that much yet?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, it's a difficult situation, and I myself on Saturday I did a patrol, a stealth patrol, I'll call it, undercover on Saturday morning, and I did notice from the people I observed, 40% of them weren't wearing masks or weren't wearing them properly. That was on Saturday morning. About an hour later, the two officers started their foot patrol, and approximately an hour after that, it was pretty much 100% of the people were wearing their masks or wearing them properly. A lot of the times, it's just a matter of people seeing two officers walking the street and maybe interacting with other people, and then they smarten up. And it seems like I guess it's human nature, but you would think at this stage in the COVID situation, everybody would be well aware of the need and the requirement for masks, and it'd be kind of an obvious thing that people would be doing. But to answer your question in regards to the scheduling, the plan is to move to longer day schedules and also increase it throughout the 7 days a week as the summer approaches. So I understand and realize that doesn't do much for the end of the ski season right now. And I do acknowledge the fact that you mentioned Friday nights and Saturday nights when there are no officers on. Unfortunately, right now, we don't have the staff to do that. It is something, though, that I will take back with me now that you've made me aware of it. And perhaps we can alter the way the shift works and still provide the same amount of hours, but maybe move the shift later in the day on those Friday and Saturday nights. And I do also appreciate your mention of the staff that are dealing with this situation. And I would encourage people that it's not up to the staff to be enforcing guidelines and regulations and bylaws. That they can suggest things, but really it's not appropriate for them to be enforcement. And that's unfortunate that they get put in that position. So I do sympathize with them, and we will, as I can say, we will be moving into longer 7 day a week, longer day coverage. However, you likely won't really see a big change in that until May. Based on the manpower and the way it's working right now. But I will definitely take this back to my staff, and we will look at the potential of changing the hours perhaps on Friday and Saturdays to help with that situation. The other thing too I would mention is this come as a question, or I think it was a couple of weeks ago, why is there have to be two people? And the reason is that to do a foot patrol or to do a patrol in law enforcement, the norm is to do it 2 deep or with two people, and that's strictly a safety factor. Our officers aren't equipped to do individual patrols just based on the potential of the bad things that can happen. So our policy is always to have 2 deep when we do any type of interaction that could result in say, conflict. So thank you. Hopefully I answered your question, and I will get back to you and to council with the potential of changing the hours of those shifts.
Thank you very much.
For that, Councillor Trudeau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Van Tiegen, for your report. My question has basically been answered by your previous comment, and that yes, I would like to see some coverage in peak hours. And yes, it will require change in schedule, but I think that it's like anything else when you have to cover the peak times. And I'm glad to hear that you're receptive to changing schedules, and hopefully this will be implemented at least immediately during the ski season. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Trudeau. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland, and thank you, Mr. Van Tiegen, for your excellent report today. I'd like to also commend your department on the training that's taken place recently, specifically the mental health resiliency training. And that type of training is so important, and we all know that. So it's great to see that that's ongoing. And I wanted to also offer gratitude to you and your team for keeping our community safe and doing what you do day in and day out. I see the personal level of dedication that the staff and volunteers offer our community, and just want to make sure that they hear how appreciated and valued they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. I apologize for cutting you off, Your Worship. I was just going to thank you for your kind words and assure you that I'll pass that on to the members of the fire department. And it is nice to hear that, and I will definitely pass it on. So thank you.
Councillor DeMota.
Thank you. I'd like to get just to get back on the fire smart questions. And regarding the department, I don't need to reiterate what the other councillors said. We're quite grateful in our community to have such a great crew like yours, and I just want to give a shout out to the ladies on the crew. And I saw the social media pic on the International Women's Day. It's nice to see our growing membership. There, pardon me. I appreciate the info getting back on the fire smart and some financial recovery on that wood removal near the cemetery. Do we have an idea how much fire smart makes off of that, or the numbers aren't in yet for this year?
Thank you, Councillor DeMota. No, I do not have any numbers in particular, and I couldn't even hesitate to guess right now. I'm not a timber expert by any means. I know there is a big pile of logs there, but what that equates to financially, I couldn't say. Only thing I will reassure you is that 100% of that goes back into the project and will be used in either this fall or early in 2022.
Either way, that's good to hear. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all for those questions, and thank you, Mr. Van Tiegen, for those responses. I have a few questions arising from your report. If I could turn first to the bylaw question. The number of patrols, the frequency, and the number of officers required is all in response to COVID. Am I safe in assuming that that extra work is all tracked so that it could, if the potential arises, be allocated to either most funding or some replacement of most, if that comes in? It seems to be all of this work is work that would not normally be done and might be eligible for funding from other sources.
Yes, Your Worship, it is all tracked, and it could be broken out if it was needed for COVID specific funding or something of that sort. But just to be clear that the officers' foot patrols also encompass a lot of other whatever they encounter, but there's also other issues that they deal with too on a regular basis that may not be COVID related.
Right. Understood. Yes, thank you. It really general matters, Mr. Van Tiegen, with respect to fire response, and department response, because it's not always fires. You've broken things down, particularly for motor vehicle incidents, between town and municipality parks in BC. And while I understand how BC is different, is there a practical difference that results from segregating town and municipality responses from national park responses?
Thank you, Your Worship. That particular method of reporting, I guess, is an offshoot of and it's not that long ago where Parks Canada would pay a percentage of our operational costs, and that we would always have to break out, identify the kind of the ratio between the park in general and then the town or the municipality. I think that's the reason that it's reported that way. You're right; it doesn't really mean a lot anymore. Other than, I guess, it's just a visual to see, the different areas that we're responding to and the amount of time spent in each. And as you mentioned too, BC is different because we do have an agreement with the province of BC to respond a certain distance into that province.
All right, well, I appreciate that. If it does appear at any time to be relevant, I would like to, and I would encourage you to let us know, because it's certainly possible for us to enter back into discussions about the size of our municipal boundary. The boundary that we have now replicates essentially the old school district. And at that time, there were wardens' children living out at DeCoyne, for example. So they were part of the school district. But if that is now just an expense for us because of past history, we could take steps to do something about it. But if it's not a concern now, then I won't worry about it. I wanted to echo Councillor Butler's thanks for the Fire Smart work that I see has been going on for about 18 years. And it is a perfect example of collaboration and partnership. So I do want to echo those thanks for the work and the safety that it provides to our town, but also the example that it gives in terms of collaboration, and not just with Parks Canada, although they're an important player, but also ATCO with respect to its assets, and CN as well. And on that point, I also wish to acknowledge the work that you've indicated in your report, CNREL doing with the Volunteer Fire Brigade with respect to hazardous materials and dangerous goods. It's critical that our local staff be trained on that, and it's nice to see that CN is stepping up to do that. So just pass those thanks and commendations along to your partners, if you would. It's been brought to my attention that I did not see Councillor Keller-Harempy's hand, so I apologize, Councillor Keller-Harempy, but go ahead.
That's okay, Mayor, and thank you. And thank you, Ms. Van Tieken and your department for all your work. I'm just curious, Mr. Van Tieken, the numbers in this report for emergency response, how does it compare with this time last year? Is it more or less around the same?
Off the top of my head, and it's strictly off the top of my head, I would say it is slightly more than last year at this time. We did have a considerably lower call volumes in 2020 than we had previously, and what we had to date in 2021. We were, I think, fairly consistent up until about the end of January into early February, and then after that, it dropped right off to, I think, June. We hardly had any, or May it was, we hardly had any responses at all. It was, as you know, that was when everything was pretty quiet. But it's starting to come back, unfortunately. And I guess the highways are as busy as ever, unfortunately, but yeah.
Mr. Van Tieken.
Thank you for that. If there is nothing further for Mr. Van Tieken, I thank you again for a very thorough report. Just in closing, I have a couple of observations for Mr. Given. Mr. Van Tieken has indicated in his report the need for an update of the emergency management bylaw, and I wonder whether that is something that might just be added to our tracking sheet that comes to us at Committee of the Whole, just so we don't lose sight of that. It's an important consideration that we can't lose sight of, and we should move on that fairly quickly. And secondly, Mr. Van Tighem has noted in his report that in the period during which the report covers, bylaw has dealt with 50 encroachment agreements. I understand what's involved in those things, and it's considerable work. And I just invite Mr. Given some consideration about whether bylaw is the best place for that work to be done. But I leave that in your capable hands. And otherwise, thank you very much, Mr. Van Tighem, for a very thorough report.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and thank you, Council.
That takes us to agenda item 7, but we have no bylaws for consideration today. We do have under agenda item 8, request for decision, a request for a decision with respect to Lemonade Day. Mr. Given.
Thanks, Your Worship. There is a staff cover report, but it should be noted that this is as a result of Committee of the Whole's recommendation forward to Council. So this is not a staff recommendation. This is merely a way to get that recommendation that came forward from Council acting as Committee of the Whole to the Council agenda. So you'll see the documentation that was provided at the Committee of the Whole meeting and a reflection of the motion that was made at Council Committee of the Whole that Council approved a sponsorship of $500 for Lemonade Day in 2021. But I leave it there for Council discussion and debate.
Councillor Keller-Hrampe.
Mayor Ireland, I'm prepared to make that motion that we sponsor Lemonade Day again in 2021 for $500. You participated in 2019 and was one of the judges for Lemonade. Councillor McGraw's children participated. It was great to see children from kindergarten to grade 12 put such effort into creating a business, getting a business license. I think it's excellent for young people to learn about how a business works, how to become entrepreneurs. And I think this is a great program, and I think a $500 donation. I talked with Nancy, and if we can't go ahead in June, we will go ahead in September with the program. We will work with Alberta Health and the restrictions, and I think we should support this. Thank you.
Thank you. And might I read into your comments, Councillor Keller-Hrampe, that that $500 sponsorship be applied towards the Local Entrepreneur of the Year contest. Thank you for that. Any debate by councillors with respect to the motion? I see nothing. I will call the question. The motion being that council approve a sponsorship of $500 for Lemonade Day 2021 to be applied towards the Local Entrepreneur of the Year contest sponsor as presented in the sponsorship package. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Agenda item 9. There is no correspondence for information, consideration, or action listed in the agenda. Nothing has arisen that won't come onto a subsequent agenda. Is there any new business that any councillor wishes to raise at this time? Councillor
No.
Councillor Demota, you're raising your hand to say you have no new business.
I have no new business. I'm waiting for council reports. I apologize for jumping the gun.
If there is no other new business, then we are on to agenda item 11, councillor reports. Councillor Demota.
Yeah, I'm happy to report that I attended the Culture and Rec board meeting last Thursday. We all came to the table discussing why we signed up or asked to be assigned to that board, and there was a lot of good discussion around it, and most people for similar reasons. A lot of the newer membership had indicated that they'd like to see more cultural aspects involved with the Culture and Rec board. And to not take away from other reports, I'm not sure if Jenna might have some updates on the library initiatives for including cultural and other initiatives in Robson Park. But that was discussed. You know, we discussed the potential of a labyrinth somewhere in the community, and then the rink. We discussed the arena, and there might be a potential deficiency with the boards, with the board glass, and they're sending out some samples to get tested. Apparently, some of the materials that came in weren't to spec. So I'm not going to take away from a future report from Yvonne when it comes back to the table there, but just wanted to let council be aware that there's nothing major to be concerned about right now, but they're working on making sure that the arena is going to be safe for further play. And then I also attended one of the courses that I signed up for through the elected officials program in council's role in service delivery. And that's been pretty interesting. One thing that I discovered in some communities that were having difficulties running some services that could be privatized, help fund them to start off, you know, maybe not to the same capacity that it costs to run those services, but to help private business get off the ground once they found, you know, people that wanted to run whatever service there was. So I thought maybe that concept could be brought into our further discussions in the budget down the road, maybe not with this council, but for consideration with others. You know, when we consider the full cost of running a program in the community, and then, you know, having a less of a burden in helping the private sector in starting off, and then eventually not having to deal with the full burden might be something to consider. So there would still be some tax dollars going into programs, but it wouldn't be to the full amount, you know, for a sustainable future. The other thing that I learned too is the town of Olds goes through a process every year prior to budget with a community survey that helps them assess what the wants and needs of the community are. And I thought that might be an interesting process to contemplate for Jasper down the road. I'll keep the rest of my reports short and maybe for the next council meeting, but those are my two main ones for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Other councillor reports? Councillor McGrath?
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. Just to add to Councillor Demota's question about the library, certainly there has been some chatter with staff and staff from the library connecting with staff from operations to figure out what the use of Robson Park could be for summer programming. As for plans such as a labyrinth in Robson Park, I don't know anything about the long-term plans of Robson Park. I think since I've been on council, we've heard whisperings of there might be a master plan for that area, but I haven't heard any concrete plans. So I definitely agree that there's lots of motivation and drive right now to bring more cultural programming to the community. And I think through all of the various boards and committees and organizations within Jasper, we're certainly dedicated to trying our best to bring more cultural programming to Jasper. I attended a library board meeting last Wednesday evening. I attended the Municipal Inclusion Committee on Thursday afternoon. And tomorrow I will attend the community conversation, and Thursday the Jasper Community Team Society meeting. And that's all for me.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Keller-Hrampe.
Councillor Wilson and I attended a short Community Futures board meeting yesterday, and Councillor Demota, Councillor Janot and I had a human resources meeting last week. We're starting the process on the enumeration and looking on the documentation that you forwarded to us, Mayor Ireland, and we hope to get back on both of those subjects in early April.
Thank you. Any further reports? I will report briefly then. I attended with Councillor McGrath the Inclusion Committee last week. I noticed that it is still not a listed board or committee on our list of appointments, but Councillor McGrath and I do attend at Councillor McGrath more regularly than I, because it happens to fall on court Thursdays. But we are, I think, anticipating that the committee will come forward with some recommendations before the end of its mandate, just to keep the notion alive and relevant to both everyone on council and the public generally. It's an important and very interesting, engaged committee, and I'm really happy to be sitting on it. And Lisa Riddell conducts those meetings in a really tremendous fashion, so credit to her. Last week I attended the board meeting for the museum, and tonight is the annual general meeting. So for those of you who might be society members, feel free to zoom in at 7 o'clock tonight, see what new board of directors gets elected for the museum board, among other things. Tomorrow, Councillor Wilson and I have a West Yellowhead Regional Waste Management Board meeting where I think we'll be looking at requests for proposals with respect to the consultancy work that we have undertaken to restructure the governance structure at that board. And tomorrow as well, I think, is the Economic Recovery Task Force, and I won't put Mr. Given on the spot, but hopefully he'll be joining us for that tomorrow. That is my report. If there is nothing else, I can move to agenda item 12. You have a list of upcoming events. Is anyone aware of an event upcoming that is not in that list or on that list? If there is nothing to add to it, we can move to agenda item 13, which we added, which is an in-camera motion, and I would require a motion that council move in camera to deal with the personnel issue covered by section 24 of FOIP at 10:26 a.m. Councillor Butler, I will look to you for such a motion. You so move. All in favor? There are none opposed. We will move in camera. For those watching from the public, I thank you for that. I would anticipate, and subject to anything you might say, Councillor Butler, that there will not be further debate or deliberation on the matter, which we will discuss in camera once we revert to open meeting, and we would therefore simply move to adjournment. So for those members of the public and other staff who have been tuned in for this regular council meeting, again, I thank you, but I would encourage you not to wait around to rejoin the meeting, because all you will see is all of us say we are adjourned and wish each other a pleasant Tuesday. Councillor Butler, you agree that there will be nothing arising?
That's what I would expect. Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. I will give a few moments for people to log out. It might be an opportune time to allow councillors a bit of a recess. So I would say that we could reconvene at 10:35 and we will be in camera at that time. So I will see you all then.